All right, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Susan Perry, our author of the day. Susan joins us having recently released her latest book, The Hidden Power of Aikido. And just tell you a little bit about Susan. She has practiced Aikido for nearly 50 years. She holds a Rokudan in Aikido, a 6th-degree black belt, a doctorate in philosophy, and is a Godan or 5th-degree black belt in Japanese calligraphy. She's best known for founding and publishing the Aikido Today magazine. And she is now president of the Aiki Institute. She is a former assistant professor in the California State University system and lives in Claremont, California. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Very happy to have you. I've been really enjoying reading this latest book. And I wanted to start just by kind of asking you about what motivated you to publish this book, The Hidden Power of Aikido.
That's a good question. During the COVID period, I offered, because now I teach, or then I was teaching through a city program, and the city just closed down classes. There was no choice about that. And so I offered, I don't know, I thought, well, maybe students, that are new would like to still meet and talk to people about things, and maybe there would be some grounding that could be offered by the small group and so forth. So anyway, I offered a Zoom meeting. It wasn't a class. It was just a time to get together and chat, see how people were doing, keep up with people, that kind of connection. I did offer another class, and I offered a brush class. So I did a couple of classes through Zoom, but this was scheduled during the regular class time because I knew that they had that in their schedule. And I thought maybe it would be useful. And so, students came for maybe one or two meetings, and then sort of dropped off. But then other people started coming. There was a kind of exchange, and I didn't really understand how that happened, but like I said, I try to just cheerfully accept what's going on because usually there's good stuff there somewhere. And I ended up without any of my local Aikido people at all. But I had old friends from Washington, D.C. and Boulder, Colorado, and Northern California. And, there was a little group of us, and we started talking. And these are people I used to, when I traveled a lot, I would see often. And since I closed the magazine down in 2005, I really didn't travel much anymore. So it was fun, and I was amusing them by telling them stories of the people I'd met during my 20 years with Aikido Today magazine, and kind of interesting stories, no bad stories. I don't gossip, that kind of stuff, but I was impressed by a number of people, and I remembered certain things, and I would share those. And then he said, "Oh, you've got to write those down." And I said, "Oh, what do you mean I got to write them down? I already did all those interviews and everything. Why do I have to do more work?" "Oh, no, you've got to write these down. They're interesting. They'll be lost once you pass away and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Okay, well, all right." So I started recording and then writing them down. And I didn't quite know why I was doing all of that, but it seemed like a good idea. And so I was writing them down, and I invited my brother, who's much older than me. He is 9 years older than me, and he's an esteemed philosopher now, emeritus. But I invited him to one of the groups because he's in philosophy and I'm in philosophy, and always enjoyed talking to Aikido people. So I said, "Well, why don't you be an invited guest?" And he came, sat in on one or two. I did that with Mary Heine too, a couple of people. But anyway, so he said, "Why?" I told him what I was doing with all these stories, and he says, "Why don't you write a monograph on Aikido?" And a monograph is just short. It's just a simple, like a little introductory thing. And I thought, I was persuaded. I thought that sounds, instead of this open-ended ad infinitum project I had launched myself on, I thought, oh, I could do that. I know what that is. So I wrote that, and then he lectures around, and he was invited to Rutgers, and he's older, and his wife couldn't travel with him that time, so he asked me to go with him to the Rutgers talk, and that we could go to New York City for a few days afterwards, and he could introduce me to his agent and maybe find a publisher for I had a whole draft of my monograph. So I said, that sounds good. And so we did that, and his agent was conveniently out of town, but we had fun anyway. So I had this draft, and so I started looking around for people that might be interested in it. And I remembered Richard Grossinger with North Atlantic Press that used to be in Berkeley. And during in the day, Aikido Today magazine, our paths would cross a few times, and he was actually upset with me. He said, because I published Remembering O-Sensei. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but it was around 2001 or so that got published by Shambhala Publications.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, and not Richard. And he said, why didn't you send me that book? I would have wanted to publish that book. I said, well, you didn't ask me to write that book. Oh, and Shambhala did. They sent me to Japan and all this stuff. And sorry, but so I got a hold of him. He's now in Maine with Inner Traditions. And I said, how about you publish this book? Years later, right? I mean, it was so long ago. So anyway, I went through the whole process of writing a proposal. And then it became, instead of a monograph, it became this 260 some page book. But it's okay, because you all understand the forces of nature. They expand and they contract, right? So I had this huge expansive project of stories about sensei, and it came down into a little monograph, and now expanded into a bigger book. So that's the story. They took a very long time to publish it, but I think that's how they do it there. I don't know. So I haven't been I have a publishing company, but I did publish a few books. My late husband and I would do those together. Aikido Talks and Living by Design and George Storage Unit Aikido. I haven't, those are not really available except for what I have left in my archival things. But this and the Remembering O-Sensei are still available through the two publishers that publish them. So
All right. Well, thank you for that insight into the process. Sounds like it was a very organic process that gave rise to this book.
go
So
with that.
I want to just ask a little bit about the title. You called it the hidden power of Aikido. Now, the power of Aikido, the external power, is observable as people go flying through space and take roles. What's the hidden power about?
Well, I could say something very deep here, but actually, um, it's a whole power struggle with the publisher. I didn't design that cover, and they had a title, and this is pretty typical of publishers, is that they're putting the book out, they have marketing departments, and they know what sells, and their object is to sell the book. So they had titled the book The Soft Power of Aikido. And I thought, oh, no, that's not going to be workable. Well, you guys all understand, right? Soft power just makes it sound like, oh, it's that passive martial art, and, just people whirling around and doing mindless things. And so I tried really hard to come up with a title that the marketing department at Inner Traditions would accept. And this was the one they accepted. I also had a different cover in mind, not this guy that's kind of maybe at the end of a throw or something. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think the colors are nice, but I had actually tried hard to, I had a picture of the, and sort of an art picture I had taken of the O-sensei statue that's on the beach side of Tanabe.
Mhm.
You know, O-sensei's in one of those great power positions that he sort of lived in. And the sky was behind him, and it had this same kind of sort of a silhouette, and the colors, the blue and the, so I thought that would fit in just perfectly there. They don't have to change much, but it would be so much better. Instead of the kind of horizontal thing that would verge on the vertical, which if you've read the book is kind of getting into the area of divine stuff and maybe hidden power things. But no, they wouldn't. They did consider it. I mean, one of the senior editors I went back and forth with, and she said they did agree to take it up and have a meeting and consider it, but basically, no, it was not, it was not going to happen. So I got the title.
So, so
Got
you
the
wanted,
title
okay, you got the
correct.
title. So you didn't actually come up with the title necessarily in a vacuum.
No, no, and that's my name. I got my
Okay.
name, and they put it how they wanted it, but yeah. So
All right. Well, let me read just one sentence from the book, which happens at the very end of chapter 11.
well, you
Set.
want me to give you a deeper answer to the question you just asked me?
Sure, that'd be great.
I feel like I don't want to disappoint. Of course, you might enjoy the ins and outs of the publishing world, but the hidden power of Aikido is really what I wanted to talk about, because we all know the techniques. You know, the techniques seem to be um, the main focus of most dojos when a new student walks in the door, or a DVD or a demonstration or anything. You know, it's just those amazing whirling motions of people flying around. And I don't want to take away from that at all, except that's just so obvious. It's right there, you know. It grabs your attention first thing. But a lot of people just sort of stay with that. You know, I've been around a lot of different dojos, and a lot of people just like that. They're high steppers and they do well with the physical mechanics of Aikido, and that's just all they want. And I think that's fine. But there's this other dimension of Aikido, which I think the founder really wanted to generate for the world. And that's the dimension that can lead us into creating better people and ultimately world peace. Well, we should have been working on that a little harder, I think, over these last 60 years. But and I wanted to talk about that. And that's a very difficult thing to express. And I didn't really view this book as a book for Aikido people. I wanted to offer what abilities I have to maybe draw some more people into the art of Aikido, because you know, this was after COVID, and I talked to my friends who are, you know, senseis that go around and teach all over the place, and they were describing for me, not to me, the difficulties that dojos were having, some closing because of the lack of students, and you know, student bodies kind of um uh withering down. And so I thought, well, I'd like to write a book, because there are amazing things about Aikido that usually don't get talked about. Sometimes they do, but for the most part, they're not the first thing that people meet. And maybe I could draw some people into the art where they could go and sort of populate dojo. And so I was writing for an audience that had no idea what Aikido was. And so it was kind of nice. I had a clean slate, as it were, you know, and they could go be wowed by all the technical stuff anyway. Or instructors maybe who were still looking for pockets of inspiration in the art that they'd studied for a while.
Mhm.
And it was an opportunity for me to pass along tremendous lessons that I'd learned over the years from a lot of people who aren't around anymore. And I have a background in philosophy, so um, I really wanted to write about the philosophy of Aikido in a way that didn't say to people that they don't need to practice, but in a way that would maybe entice them to practice, because I believe that it's mind body, if you will. We don't really have a good name for this, but it's an organic process that includes both sides
Mhm.
of being mindful about what you're doing, as well as your body movements involved in all that mindfulness. And I also wanted to I tried to do this with my other book, Remembering O Sensei. I wanted him to be elevated in history as not just a great martial artist, he was that, of course, but as a spiritual leader, maybe, or as a philosopher, could
Mhm.
be. I mean, uh,
Yeah, and you make parallels in this book between him and his thinking and Aristotle. Could you say a little bit about those parallels?
sure. Okay, all right. So this, yes. Then, so I'm starting with a clean slate, and I'm addressing a non-Aikido population in my mind, not necessarily, but hopefully making the population bigger by that inclusion. And so, if you hit an audience, a Western audience, up with the Kojiki and some of these things that O Sensei says, I know what happens, because I've I've seen it in a lot of classes I used to teach. The eyes gloss over and the head nods down, all this stuff. Anyway, I thought, okay, how can I? Because Eastern philosophy is a little different from Western. And if you just take a regular Western thinker, and not a philosopher per se, but just a kind of person off the streets that can think, then they're not going to be grabbed by some of the stuff Osensei says. And Osensei didn't write books. And there are other great thinkers in history that didn't write books, but their students wrote books expounding their ideas. And so I thought, well, I wrote my dissertation on Aristotle. So he was somebody I was very familiar with. And he's also supposed to be sort of the father of logic, the way the Western mind thinks. And he's the father of he used to write on everything, all the different sciences and ethics and metaphysics and all different kinds of stuff. So usually in any field you go into, an introductory class, they'll say, well, you know, Aristotle said that. They start with him and then they go on to more modern stuff. So that, well, people, even if they don't know about Aristotle, because he's formed so much of the sort of deductive way we go about thinking of things, he can help me here. And so, and I thought also, it wasn't just usury, but I felt very deeply that Aristotle and O Sensei were very similar. One was east and one was west. One was much older. Aristotle is much older than O Sensei, but they were both about the same kind of thing. And really, in Western philosophy, Aristotle sort of breaks the mold, because he had a practical philosophy. That is, his deductions ended with an action, not just another proposition,
Mhm.
which really threw most philosophers, academic philosophers, into a tizzy. But I understood that. That was Aikido, right? So you a mindfulness, and then it issues in action. And so I thought maybe at the same time I could do a reverse thing and sort of educate whatever Western philosophers might read my book a little more about one of their own.
Yeah.
So I included Aristotle, and now you've been reading it, Susan. You said
Yes.
you think that worked?
Yeah, I thought that what stood out to me was sort of the way Aristotle conceived of developing the virtuous man as sort of the
Oh yeah,
cornerstone of, or the virtuous human, as the
person, yeah.
core, yeah, of building a civilization, and how. you really drew a direct line to O Sensei's thinking and nicknaming it the art of peace and his whole desire to bring peace to the world through Budo.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, I have talked to people who really sort of view O Sensei as a religious nut. To it sounds severe, but I've heard people say that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And these are people who like the physical aspect of the art and kind of embrace what O Sensei was doing in the 40s and 50s, 1940s and 50s. And and that's okay. People can practice whatever little bit they take from him. I think that's true. But they shouldn't be saying, this is the real art. This is the only art. You know, all the rest is just doesn't matter and it's fluff. And he was dotty when he was older and saying crazy things. No, I don't think that that's right. And uh, and another thing that sort of feeds that position is that he would tell stories from the Kojiki. But
Can you say a little bit about the Kojiki for people who don't know what it is?
Kojiki is the oldest book of Japan, indigenous book, and it trots out what became known as Shinto, the way of the gods, kami, not really God in our sense of the Western gods, but and they really were a collection of stories, like the Bible is a collection of stories. You know, I was thinking about this the other day. I didn't really talk about the Bible here, but like I heard Solomon Rushdie, he's got a new book out. I heard him interviewed yesterday on a radio show, and I thought, oh, I'm going to be interviewed. Maybe I should listen to this interview and see how it goes. And anyway, the interviewer asked him if he liked the Old Testament or the New Testament, if he preferred one over the other. And he said he liked the old. He said he liked the new too, but the stories in the Old Testament were really great stories. And, you know, also in ancient Greece, there's all the gods and goddesses up on Mount Olympus, like Zeus and Hera and all of those. And cultures use those, as Salman Rushdie was explaining, to kind of explain what we're doing here and how should we behave and what sort of things should we be paying attention to. And I think Osensei was using the Kojiki stories in just that way when he addressed his, at the beginning, mostly Japanese audience, young people who had learned those stories as kids, you know, like people hear about Noah and the Ark and stuff like that, Daedalus and Icarus, a guy who flew too close to the sun. Are you familiar with that story? It's
Mhm.
one I always tell my son because I always view him as doing that, you know. Somebody gets excited about what they're doing and then they get a little too brash and then they get a little too close. Interpretation is they get a little too close to the sun, which melts the wax on the
Max holding the feathers on his wings. Yeah.
yeah, and then they fall. My grandson was over the other day, was doing hanging something for me, and he's a very agile young man. He's like 22, and he was walking on the arm rests of my hefty wooden chairs, you know, and I'm thinking, oh, this is not good. His father was there too, and then he got really you know, confident in himself, and in the last chair he fell over and hit his head, and this broke, and that, you know, it was just, it's like, okay, you know, that is an Icarus moment. Flying too close to the sun, young man.
And I like that parallel, you know, Noah and the Ark, who hasn't heard that story. It's yes, it's from a religious volume that we call the Bible, and yet you know, kids' toys are made out of it, and you know, it also is a fable or a legend. And you know, the rainbow is explained by that legend, that kind of thing. So the Kojiki became, as you're saying, the way for O Sensei to connect with pre-existing beliefs in his students to explain the purpose of his art.
Well, the Kojiki was particularly Japanese. I mean, the Japanese were great at taking Buddhist thought, but that starts in India and travels through China to Korea and then down to Japan, and even the language with the characters kind of went in that direction. But this was purely Japanese.
Mhm.
And so I think O Sensei kind of liked that.
Makes sense. And I hear the parallel with you saying, well, I'll use Aristotle, who's the founder of much of our thinking, to connect to people in the same way, which not only did the same thing as O Sensei, but also illustrated what he was up to. And I do want to read the sentence I referenced at the end of the chapter called An Ocean of Energy. And you said that is really the premise of this book,
Oh,
to bring into the light the sources of our modern practices for a deeper understanding of the art. And I noticed that you went to great lengths to explain certain concepts that are tossed around the Aikido world all the time, like Masakatsu Agatsu Katsu Hayabi. I had no
yeah.
idea that came from the Kojiki
I
until I
know,
read.
right? I did it for a number of years. I
Yeah,
don't know. Yeah.
yeah,
I was thunderstruck when I learned that. And then it was the name of a kami.
yeah, yeah.
Not
I did.
even, well, because I view philosophy and theology as maybe having some overlap or some relationship, but not the same thing. Theology is, the base of religions, and religions have a dogma.
Mhm.
Philosophy, like as per Aristotle, is about the big picture thinking and so forth, wondering what is and what's this, what's that. But it doesn't have a leap in faith. It's not supposed to have a dogma. You're supposed to be able to see all the propositions, and they all should be related in a certain way, in a logical way. And so, I forgot why I started talking about that.
Well, I was just going to say that yet each in its own way is concerned with the question of how we live as human beings. And that's the point that you make so eloquently in the book, is that O Sensei was concerned with the same question. And I see this book, which I just finished this morning, by the way.
Oh, wow.
As
Congratulations.
thank you. And I've recommended to my students that they should borrow it from me and read it themselves. But
Pay their own
I
copy.
see this, or get their own copy.
See, if
Um,
I tell a whole lot, they'll ask me to do another book. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, that's okay. But I see this book is sort of really going to great lengths to explain these underpinnings
Yeah,
and to really go back in time and shine a light on, like, that this is where this concept came from. This was its original meaning. This is how O Sensei used it, and sort of tie it together into the idea that the hidden power of Aikido, I think this book suggests, is the power to transform us into better human beings.
right. There you go. Thank you for explaining that. And that explains the hidden business, right? Because we hear these things, but we don't know much about them if we're not Japanese and well versed in Japanese history and Kojiki and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think it's meaningful. It's not only meaningful, I mean, it's meaningful to know where these practices came from. Although, as I admit, I wasn't in it for the meaning, really. I just enjoyed the practice. But because I was studying, I think I was a graduate student when I started, and I had my hands full with that philosopher. I wasn't really looking for more. But eventually it did come and strike me on my head and make me open my eyes. And I was offended at first, but then as I learned more and found people to talk to who could show me more and more, I was really impressed with what was behind all this. And it was covered up for a number of years because, Aikido sort of became noticeable here in the States and in the West not so long after World War II. And so we had this difficulty with, because Japan was on the other side of all of that fighting. And then when Japan was occupied by the Western forces, there was a certain amount of control over just how much could be. Kishimaru was really wonderful, Sensei's son. and the late founder of, the late leader of Aikido. But you know, if you trot out the Kojiki, it would have been shut down because Hirohito really embraced a state Shinto, but the Western forces over there at that time didn't understand all the nuances of Shinto has so many different sects. And O-sensei wasn't studying state Shinto, it was Omoto Kyo. And so, but Kishimoto just said, well, that Shinto stuff has to go in the closet for a while. And also overt martial arts stuff, you know, and so he managed to get Aikido out there, and they had a dojo, and actually it wasn't long after that they sent people all over the world to train people in Aikido. But that would have never happened if probably if O-sensei had been in control of the Aiki, you know, because they made a nonprofit and they had to do a curriculum, and that's when all the techniques got named, because O-sensei would call them kokyunage. And so it was hidden. You know, it was hidden, some of it was hidden intentionally. And so now, at our August time in the world, it's time to open the doors and let that stuff come out and inform us and no longer be hidden. I'm revealing it.
All right, wonderful. Well, I want to say that you know, I will be putting a link to purchase this book in the YouTube posting and on our social media, but you also have a lot of other resources. Can you say something about those things that you've already put out there in the world?
Oh, sure. You have some time?
Oh,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, some of them aren't available much anymore, but okay, so I still have Aiki.com, which is really the sort of online shop, as it were, for the magazine, Aikido Today magazine, and then the mother press, Arate Press, through which I did that magazine for 20 years. And so every time an issue was delivered to us, printed, I would take the 10 copies and wrap them up and put them aside. And so those are my archival copies. That's what I call archival copies. They haven't been handled much. They haven't been open. They haven't been marked up or dented and all that stuff. But now I'm kind of getting older and I don't want to be a storage unit. And I care about these things. It's been a number of years since Aikido Today magazine was published. 2005 was the end of it. So that's about 20 years. And there's a whole generation or more of Aikido students who've come up since then, and maybe they'd be interested in it. So I actually hired a guy to put an e-commerce site together, because I kind of let that go. And all the issues are there in their full glory with the table of contents. And I'm just releasing all the archival copies. I see them on eBay. You know, I see used copies being offered here and there for a lot of money. And I thought, well, you know, I don't know if they're selling or not, but they're really great things. And they have interviews and seminar reports and dojo spotlights, editorial by me, of course, and articles by other people. I always encourage people to send in reports or interviews. Yes, Rob?
I was just putting my hand up as the author of a couple of those articles.
Yeah, Rob. Rob was a contributor to that project, and it was a kind of amazing magazine. It wasn't a calculated effort. It's kind of like my book. It wasn't a calculated effort to make a lot of money or anything, which it never did. But although at our heyday, our print number was 14,000 copies.
Wow.
I am very proud of that. And 20% of our readership was overseas. So from a meager beginnings, I just hit it at the right time. I just had a tremendous amount of interest in it because people wanted to get together. There was no place where you could get information. And so it was a repository of information with a centerfold of events. And that's another thing nobody was doing at that time. In fact, if the Federation had a seminar and ASU had a seminar, Yamada and Sao Tome, then students couldn't go to the other seminars. They get kicked out of the dojo. It was like that. It was so competitive. It was like a little feudal land here. And I didn't like that. And because even then I did know Aikido was supposed to be bringing people together, and unifying and connecting and all that great stuff. So anyway, I would find, and then later people would just send them in voluntarily, the events that their dojo was going to have, and I'd post them all in the center. So
So
Aikido today. So
Aiki.com is where you've got all of the archival copies of Aikido
right,
today.
right. You can scroll through and see all their covers. And like I said, I spent a lot of time and getting this just that way. And you can see the table of contents. So you can see those two things. And also,
And then you can purchase digital access.
no, you purchase the hardcover copies.
Okay, hardcover copies. Okay,
Yeah, I'm old school.
Yeah.
But my late husband, before he died, did put all 100 issues on a CD. So the whole issue, not just the cover and the table of contents, but the whole issue. So somebody could buy one of those and have that at their disposal. That I did a number of DVDs, Mary Heine, John Stevens, a lot of Saotome Sensei and so forth. And for expos, I did events in San Diego and Seattle and Portland and Toronto, with the help of a great number of people. And we did a professional film of the senseis there. It was a workout. So primarily it was to get together. All those teachers came with like 10 students and there was a big training session. But in those days, if you got a video or something of a teacher teaching, the sound would be bad and you'd have all the backs of the heads of people sitting there in the line. You've probably seen some of those. And I thought, no, we're going to do a nice video, and I'd hire professional people in the cities that I went to. And my husband and I would edit them, put them out. These were expos. And so Budo Videos, Jake McKee, has taken all of my DVDs and that CD, and he has formatted them into streaming copies. And so you can go to Budo Videos. I don't sell those here, but you can go to Budo Videos to get those things. And those you can just, I guess, you can just download. Isn't that how it goes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so budovideos.com and Aiki.com have other resources. And then you published that book that you mentioned.
I do sell that one. I have and you can order that from any bookseller. Remembering O Sensei and this one, The Hidden Power of Aikido. They're both of my sincere efforts to raise up O Sensei so he's not just cast as a great martial artist, but that more people would maybe look at him as a repository for helping with philosophical thought or reflection or ways to calm down. And then maybe they would drift into an Aikido class. That's really my hope. Also, I have a web page. When I wrote this book, then Inner Traditions quite forcefully said, you need an authored web page. So you see, I'm always pushed into moving forward. I guess that's a good thing. And so I hired someone because, it would take forever if I did it. Anyway, I hired a professional web designer, and susanperry.info is the last place I guess I'd ask you to look. And there's a link to the Aiki.com. I also do a Substack writing. I've taken on a kind of writing practice. I call it my writing Misogi practice. And it's very short. You see those, don't you, Rob? Some of them?
Yes, I do.
And anyway, you can put your email in there. Or I think you can even go look at them without that. There's no, I'm not, there's no fees attached. It's all free stuff. And sometimes I write about Aikido and Takimusu Aiki, and sometimes I write about a poor little bees that had a wet wing that I found on my counter one morning. It just depends. It's just a writing practice. Usually isn't much longer than a couple of paragraphs, but it's usually pretty uplifting stuff. I do it first thing in the morning, And I try to reflect on things that bring me joy, because I think that that's an important part of our worldly experience. And it's a great way to start each day, is to find a reason to experience joy. So before I listen to the news or any of that stuff, I go there. And some people, actually, I have some neighbors and people who read it every day. I'm just astounded. But
Okay, so
anyway,
that's a Substack under
also,
your name?
what's that? Oh, yeah, under the susanperry.info. Then on the menu, there's a Substack thing, and I think Aiki.com. And there's also a gallery, because I'm actually stepping back from teaching a bit to pursue my writing and my artwork, which I've done really at the very beginning of my Aikido practice. I met up with Kazuaki Tanahashi and John Stevens, and they are Zen monks and also artists. Kaz was a student of O-sensei's as a young man and kept connections with him for a long time. But he's over in the States now and does circles with huge brushes, which I'm going to do in a week on Saturday at the Monterey Park Cherry Blossom Festival. But anyway, I've done a number of drawings. I'm a member of the local artists association, and take a look at my gallery. It's kind of interesting. I in my own, and I view it as really Aikido. And I used to give a lot of classes in this, and I used to talk about how the brush and the sword are really the same thing. And they say, oh, the brush is mightier than the sword. Some
Or the
writers say,
pen, somebody.
well, but the brush for a Chinese person at one point was like the pen. But it's an interesting progression, if I do say so myself. So there's a number of things that you might find interesting. And I think there's, great, there's Aikido, there's spirals, there's Takimusu Aiki, there's Iriminage in my brushwork. I'm practicing those things because you get a brush loaded, you load up the brush like you load up with Kushinage, right?
Mhm.
And then bam, big splat. Splats are really preferred, big brush stuff. And then circles, yeah, or, the Zen brush I do is, well, now I'm doing watercolor, which is a little more complicated, but it's had all of those Aikido principles available to me in that. And so maybe you'll see those Aikido principles expressed in a completely different art form. I'd be interested in knowing if you did. But just that kind of feeling, because well, Ano Sensei, he's a sensei I like a lot, and he's very old, probably won't be around much longer. He's in Japan, but he talks about what happens in the space between two people.
Mhm.
And so as Aikido students, then you'll be very interested in that and thinking about that. But also, I think, well, and as Aiki extensions people, you'll be interested in how you take that out into the world and use it. What happens in the space between two people?
Mm.
It's not just two bodies of clay with nothing, and you can, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. But yeah, and I think that goes with artwork too. My teachers taught me that, I mean, there's a whole bunch of calligraphy teachers, and I've taken classes with a lot of them, and they're just about the form. Like some people in Aikido are just about the form. But the teachers I really studied most with and was affected by more deeply were the teachers that said, if you're good inside, think about Aristotle's virtue and O-sensei's Makoto and those kinds of things. Then when you take a brush and you let your energy out, because you have to do that from your center, then that goodness will display itself on the canvas or paper or whatever. And that's really kind of the guiding light I go by. Much different than Western art, which you can go back and correct. And you have to have, posture, ma'ai, all that stuff is available there. And then when somebody looks at it, I think maybe you capture just a little bit of that. And then, because in Aikido, have you ever tried to take a photograph of somebody being thrown? Because people like to have photos of them doing big falls, right? It's really hard. I mean, you can get it too far at the end or too far at the beginning, or, it's just very hard to capture that moment where all that takes place. And I always viewed painting as being able to capture the moment. There's a trace of it left on the page.
Interesting view. All right, thank you. I'm going to actually open it up for questions
Oh, sure.
or comments or observations, if anyone has any.
Even criticisms, I'm a professional responder to criticism too. Yes, Rob.
I had planned to ask about the parallels between the brush and the sword, but you ended up kind of already covering that. I was intrigued by your sort of dismissal of soft power as a phrase earlier on in the conversation, because that term is used in politics to refer to all the things basically the State Department of a country should be doing so that the War Department doesn't have any work to do, right? And how, some politicians are much better at marshaling these resources and maintaining things. Hillary Clinton was often credited as being a master of soft power. And Obama certainly had an awareness sufficient to cover that stuff. And one of my interests is the overlap between Aikido and politics, and how the movements we learn on the mat are directly analogous to what Gandhi did to get the British out of India, and what Martin Luther King did in the civil rights struggle and stuff. So that may not be the definition of soft power you were reacting to. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on how does Aikido show up in the daily news? Can you read the daily news and see, yeah, that person's kind of doing a little bit of Aikido there?
Sure. I have my favorites. I wasn't really a political watcher for a number of years, much to my father's chagrin. But certainly the more current events, like in the last 10 years, have drawn my attention. And like just in all those impeachment things, Jamie Raskin, I actually sent Jamie Raskin, Senator Jamie Raskin, right? That guy. I actually sent him one of my cards and wrote a nice missive to him because, beforehand I had seen just politicians as being maybe the worst examples of what you see on television, and I just didn't want any part of that. But I was watching those events and with great interest, and I was just really impressed with that particular man and his grasp of the big picture and of the details, and being able to make intelligible sense of all of that in forceful arguments. I just thought he was great. And one of my Zoom people, going back to that group of Zoom people I ended up with as this book started, and they are a big part of this, by the way. I would send them, my rewrites, and we would all meet and talk about them. But anyway, I digress. Back to Jamie Raskin. One of them lived in Maryland and rode his bike by Jamie Raskin's house. So I wanted him to drop off my card because I figured somebody like that, what's the chance of my card ever making it to him, right? It'd be caught by some assistant. And I didn't leave my return address or my name. I just wanted him to know that what he was doing really touched me and brought me back into the fold of as an interested citizen and looking at the activity of politics. So Jamie Raskin comes to mind as somebody I think has great skills along those lines. And there's others, of course. I'm a great watcher of MSNBC, which probably tells you want to know about my political outlook. But there's
Right there with you.
a lot of people there that that are that are wonderful and spending their lives trying to do good things in public service. And I don't know how they manage to go in every day and face all this stuff that they're facing right now. It's hard enough, even as a viewer on television, to look at that. It's just so I think I find it in certain personages. And for example, I don't think Bibi Netanyahu is anywhere close to any of this stuff. I'm not a fan. And so you get this spectrum of people. And I suppose, the thing is, I just wrote about this the other day on my writing thing about humility, because I think that that's really important. Humility and as a Western concept, maybe selflessness, something like that, egolessness. Although I think we need a little bit of ego because we have a driver's license and an address, but the kind of arrogance we don't want to have. And so looking at politicians, I mean, where in Western culture would you go to find people of that kind of, selflessness and so forth? I really didn't think looking at politics would give me some people like that, but I was really happy to find that there's plenty. Yeah. And the poll workers. I mean, we got a glimpse into all the different mechanics of politics going on. The poll workers, what are their names?
The ones in Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My heart just went out to them, and here they are just trying to do their job. And then the stories of other poll workers from all over the country that are getting threats, and it's just like, no, what's the matter with people? This is not how it's supposed to work, and how in the world are we going to reclaim this? So we've got a lot of people struggling hard, and I'm trying to, urge people to be better and to develop themselves better, develop their kids better. So yeah, let's see. You asked me if I found that in politics in any way. I like your
Yeah.
description of State Department stuff. And I did, there were a number of State Department people interviewed during those same impeachment from Ukraine. It was the first one that Adam Schiff was a leader of. And I was pretty impressed with those people as well. And the interview, I like oh God, what's their name? There's two attorneys that are often on MSNBC that I really think are amazing. And oh, their
All
names.
right, just for the sake of time, I just want to maybe give time for one more question and then we should wrap up.
All right.
But we want people to watch the video. So
Sure.
our experience is if it gets too long, they don't
You
watch it.
edit it?
Yeah, no, we don't edit it. So
Oh, okay. Understood.
yeah. So Vince, did you have something you wanted to ask, or Rich?
No, I'm just really excited to read the book. I'm really
Right.
looking forward to it.
Right. Oh, thank you. That's a compliment. Was it because of the interview, I guess, right?
Yeah, you're a fascinating person, and I'm
Oh.
honored to be watch the interview.
Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Rich? Are you going to get the book?
Oh, yes.
Good.
So, but I have a quick question for you.
Oh, sure.
I'm fascinated by people's little journeys here. And you had mentioned, and it kind of grabbed my attention when you said, and I think it was around the Masagatsu Arigatsu, but I could be wrong. You said when you first heard this, you were offended. And then you thought about it. And I just wanted to say, wait, go back. What were you offended? And how did that take you to where you're at now? Like how did that?
I'll tell you. And
Mhm.
and when you get the book, you'll find that I cover that a little bit there too. But I was a philosopher and wasn't interested in religion, really. And about that time when I discovered that one of the kami was named, that the principle came from the name of a kami, then I was offended because it seemed like it was a religion. So I hadn't yet come to terms with what the Kojiki was. I did travel over to Japan. I did interview priests, actually the priests that O-sensei knew at the great shrines like Kumano Hongu Taisha, which is a tremendous shrine. And I had several interviews, and they were serious interviews. And it was about this. It was about this particular thing because I didn't want to get it wrong.
Mhm.
But I was kind of consumed with the thought of, why is this from the Kojiki? Why is this getting put into Aikido? I was told it was a modern martial art. I was interested in the techniques like everybody else is. And I don't want to be, I didn't know much about the Japanese culture and or the language. That has changed quite a bit. But I wasn't really interested in that. I was interested in the practice. And so then when I got glimmers of these things, I was worried that I was getting kind of sucked into a system where more would be expected of me or more would be assumed of me or something like that. Because I remember talking to people and saying, I want to just separate out Aikido from the Japanese culture. Well, of course you can't do that, really. But I was trying to do that, and it's good because that sort of lame-brainedness led me into all kinds of wonderful discoveries, which really have enriched my life. And I hope by my insights and epiphanies, I can share that with other people too.
All
Yeah.
right, wonderful. Well, I appreciate that sensibility of going from don't talk to me about esoteric Japanese religious practices to, oh wait, that's not what this is. This is a practical philosophy. Excuse me.
Well, and in Japanese speak, I mean, I was taken into forests and there's tengus and there's all kinds of really amazing creatures that populated O-sensei's world. And I enjoyed discovering them once I could kind of put things into perspective, I guess. Yeah, so I have chapters devoted to those things. I call the forest O-sensei's dojo. And I think
Yeah.
that that's right. Yeah, so anyway,
Wonderful.
you have my email address somewhere posted, perry@icloud.com. You can, I think it's on my webpage. I'm always free for questions and so forth, so.
Wonderful.
Appreciate
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
We will put links to where people can purchase the book. We'll put links to the other resources you mentioned, your email address, and
Wonderful. Yeah.
I will let you know when this gets published to the net this interview. So in the meantime, I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay, yeah, makes a good Christmas present.